Ladies and gentlemen, today I invite you to reflect on a paradox that holds incredible power. Silence, shared in words. Even who has listened beyond sound, felt the weight of a power, or despondences, knows the truth. Some of the deepest understandings knows the truth. At first glance, silence and words appear to be in opposition. Silence implies stillness, the absence of sound, while words represent expression, noise, and communication. However, when we explore their deeper meanings, we begin to see how they are not just coexisting forces, but intricately woven together. Silence is not merely the lack of speech. It can be a profound form of expression in itself. Similarly, one, curiously, a trust where silence can be articulated and words depaziono. Scusi, we heal. The clearest we heal and clearest will. Okay. There are moments in life when words fall short, yet silence speaks volumes. Think of standing beside someone in grief. Often, no sentence can comfort, like simply being present in shared silence. Conversely, there are times when silence is expressed most powerfully through the right words. A heartfelt poem, a brief message of love, a quiet "I'm here." In such moments, words carry not just sound but the weight of what is unsaid. This is where silence shared in words becomes meaningful, when language becomes a subtle instrument, not to fill silence but to echo it with compassion and clarity. This paradox is also evident in literature and art. The most memorable lines in poetry often hold more in the spaces between the words than in the words themselves. A well-placed pause in a speech or a novel's sparse yet emotionally charged sentence can evoke a depth of feeling that long-winded explanations cannot match. Artists and authors understand this delicate balance, how to craft language that leaves room for silence to be felt, interpreted, and understood by the reader or listener. In this way, silence becomes not just something to endure, but something to honor, explore, and share, using words as its vessel. Philosophically, this duality teaches us about human connection. True communication doesn't always rely on continuous speaking. In fact, it is the moments of stillness within conversations, the gentle nod, the silent gaze, the thoughtful pause, that often carry the most authenticity. When we allow silence to enter our words, we invite understanding rather than simply transmitting information. This teaches us that communication is not just about speaking louder or more, but about knowing when to step back and let the silence resonate. Silence and words, far from being contradictions, become partners in the dance of expression, each giving meaning to the other. We live in an age where noise dominates every corner of our existence. From the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep, we are surrounded by a constant stream of sounds, notifications buzzing, conversations overlapping, vehicles humming, media blaring, and digital chatter flooding our senses. The modern world thrives on this endless noise, feeding our minds with a relentless barrage of input that often leaves little room for genuine reflection or peace. In such an environment, silence becomes increasingly rare, even uncomfortable for some, as though something vital is missing when the noise ceases. Yet, this very absence of silence signals how disconnected we become from its true value. The noise we consume daily isn't merely physical or audible, it's also emotional and mental. Social media, for example, has become a digital echo chamber of opinions, judgments, comparisons, and distractions. We scroll endlessly through curated lives, drowning in a flood of information that often does more to overwhelm than to enlighten. In the name of staying connected, we are constantly reacting and responding, seldom pausing to listen, not just to others, but to ourselves. This mental noise robs us of clarity, making it harder to understand our emotions, recognize our needs, or reflect on our values. Silence, therefore, becomes an essential but missing ingredient for our well-being. In our attempts to fill every moment with content, music while commuting, videos while eating, podcasts while walking, we've inadvertently trained ourselves to fear stillness. Silence, instead of being comforting, begins to feel like a void that needs to be filled. Yet this constant sensory stimulation numbs our deeper awareness. We become passive consumers of sound and speech, rarely contemplating the substance behind what we hear. The voices that matter, our own inner voice, the silent wisdom of presence, the subtle lessons of observation, get drowned out by the sheer volume of everything else. The result is a world that's always talking but rarely understanding. Ironically, the more we surround ourselves with noise, the more isolated we feel. Superficial connections built on constant interaction often lack the depth that silence encourages. Real human connection requires space, the kind of space that silence creates. It's in quiet moments, unhurried conversations, and wordless companionships that genuine bonds begin to form. The noise of the modern world, while omnipresent, cannot replicate the profound intimacy that shared silence can offer. Therefore, understanding the impact of noise on our lives is the first step toward rediscovering the transformative power of silence, especially when that silence finds its way into our words. Silence is often misunderstood as a void, an emptiness that needs to be filled with words, sounds, or action. But in reality, silence can be a powerful presence, a meaningful and intentional state of being. When we encounter silence, we are not necessarily encountering nothingness. Instead, we are entering a space where attention, reflection, and awareness take center stage. In this space, we can observe not only what is around us, but also what lies within us. Silence allows us to hear the quieter voices of our thoughts, feelings, and intuitions, which often get overshadowed by the noise of daily life. It is in silence that we meet our true selves. In many spiritual and philosophical traditions, silence is revered as sacred. Monks, sages, and seekers across cultures have turned to silence as a way of deepening their understanding of life and of themselves. This form of silence is not passive but alive, filled with contemplation, reverence, and intention. It serves as a tool for inward journeying, where the absence of external sound allows the soul's voice to emerge. Such silence speaks more than any sermon or lecture, for it conveys what words cannot. It becomes a presence that nurtures inner peace, fosters self-worthlessness, and deepens our spiritual connection to the world around us. Silence as presence is also deeply felt in moments of shared experience between people. Think of the quiet between two individuals watching a sunset, or the stillness in a room where friends sit together without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts, yet bound by a shared sense of comfort. These moments are not empty. They are full of unspoken connection, emotion, and meaning. They remind us that communication is not limited to spoken language. Sometimes, being with someone in silence says far more than words ever could. It says, I am here. I understand. I don't need to speak to be present with you. When we shift our perspective and begin to see silence as a form of presence, we start to value it more deeply in our lives. We become more intentional about creating moments of quiet and allowing ourselves and others the space to simply be. Silence becomes a gift, a pause from the rush, a breath between conversations, a moment of clarity. It allows for healing, for grounding, and for reconnection. Rather than something to be avoided or feared, silence becomes a companion, gentle, watchful, and wise. It teaches us to honor not only what is spoken, but also what is felt, known, and understood in the spaces in between. Pauses are often underestimated in both spoken and written communication. In a world driven by urgency and rapid exchange of ideas, the value of a deliberate pause is often overlooked. Yet, it is within a pause that clarity emerges. Pauses give us a moment to process, to reflect, and to connect with what is truly being said or what we are truly feeling. In conversation, a pause allows the speaker to choose their next words more thoughtfully, and it gives the listener space to absorb what was just communicated. Rather than being empty or awkward, a pause serves as a moment of quiet depth, adding gravity and intention to the dialogue. In public speaking, the most powerful messages are often delivered not through speed or volume, but through well-timed silence. A pause before a crucial point can build suspense, signal importance, or allow the audience to mentally and emotionally prepare for what is coming. Likewise, a pause after a strong statement can give listeners a chance to digest the meaning. These silent beats between sentences can transform a speech from mere information sharing into an emotionally resonant experience. In literature and poetry, pauses are masterfully embedded through punctuation and spacing. A line break in a poem, a long dash in a sentence, or an ellipsis in dialogue all serve as silent cues to the reader. They signal when to stop, to breathe, to consider. They create rhythm and give weight to what surrounds them. This art of pacing not only enhances readability, but adds emotional nuance, drawing the reader into the internal world of the characters, or the essence of the message. The absence of a pause can rush the reader, making the text feel flat or chaotic, while the presence of intentional silence adds dimension, mood, and reflection. In everyday interactions, pauses often open a door to deeper human connection. When we allow space in our conversations, we make room for vulnerability. Someone may take that pause to gather the courage to speak a truth, express a fear, or share a hidden thought. In contrast, constant talking without pause can be a defense against discomfort or intimacy. When we embrace the power of a pause, we send a signal that we are fully present, willing to listen, and unafraid of silence. These moments foster trust, sincerity, and understanding, allowing communication to evolve from surface-level exchange into meaningful connection. Poetry is one of the most striking examples of how silence can be intricately woven into words. Unlike prose, which often seeks to explain or narrate in detail, poetry thrives on brevity, rhythm, and suggestion. A few well-placed lines can evoke powerful emotions, not because of what is said, but because of what is left unsaid. Poets use silence through pauses, enjambments, line breaks, and punctuation to control the pace and mood of a poem. The space between stanzas, or the hush that follows a profound line, invites the reader to stop and feel. These silent intervals are not accidental. They are deliberate, allowing each word to breathe and each emotion to settle. In conversations, especially meaningful ones, silence plays a similarly powerful role. It may arise naturally in moments of vulnerability, contemplation, or deep emotional exchange. These silent stretches in dialogue are not signs of disconnection or awkwardness. Rather, they signal depth and sincerity. When someone speaks from the heart, a pause often follows, not to fill space, but to allow the weight of their words to resonate. Likewise, when we truly listen, we do not rush to reply, we let the silence linger, giving room for understanding to deepen. In this way, silence becomes not just a part of the conversation, but a reflection of mutual respect and emotional presence. Expressive silence in conversation can also be seen in acts of empathy and shared experience. There are times when words fall short, when someone is grieving, overwhelmed, or in pain, and no phrase can adequately comfort them. In such moments, silence speaks louder than any attempt at consolation. A gentle presence, a hand held without words, or simply sitting together in stillness can communicate support more genuinely than rehearsed responses. These are the moments where silence becomes a language in itself, a language of compassion, of understanding, of solidarity. It allows emotions to flow without the intrusion of unnecessary commentary or superficial platitudes. Furthermore, silence allows both poetry and conversation to transcend language and connect with something more universal. Not every emotion or experience can be articulated with precision. Some truths are too vast, too tender, or too sacred for words. It is in silence that these truths are held with reverence. A poem may end with an open image, inviting the reader into a silent realm of contemplation. A conversation may fall quiet, not out of loss, but because both people sense that nothing more needs to be said. In both cases, silence doesn't signal the end. It signals understanding. It becomes a bridge between minds and hearts, carrying meanings that words alone could never fully contain. True listening is not merely a passive act of hearing someone speak. It is an active, conscious engagement that requires presence, patience, and humility. When we genuinely listen, we surrender the impulse to interrupt, correct, or respond immediately. We create a space where the speaker feels safe to express themselves without fear of judgment or dismissal. In this space, silence becomes more than just the absence of our own voice. It becomes a respectful offering to the other person. It says, "I value your words enough to be silent." I am love you, despise everything. A personate, it is simply the reality enclosed. There is no exclusion. It is simply the reality. It is simply the reality. Listening as shared silence fosters deeper connection between individuals. In many conversations, especially those driven by ego or urgency, participants often focus on crafting their next reply rather than absorbing what is being said. This results in surface-level exchanges where neither party truly feels heard. But when one chooses to simply listen without rushing to speak, a subtle shift occurs. A speaker begins to feel understood not because of affirming words, but because of the unspoken presence holding space for them. This shared silence becomes a quiet partnership, a mutual acknowledgement of one another's humanity and worth. There is also a transformative stillness that arises within the listener themselves. In choosing to be silent and listen, we open ourselves to perspectives outside our own. We begin to hear not just the literal words, but the tone, emotion, and intention behind them. This attentiveness sharpens our emotional intelligence and deepens our sense of compassion. We recognize the unspoken pain behind a hesitant voice, or the hidden joy behind a subtle smile. To share silence, we attune ourselves to the unexpressed, the nuanced, the invisible. It is in this kind of silence that true understanding is born, not through loud declarations, but through quiet attunement to another's inner world. In relationships, whether personal, professional, or communal, listening as a form of shared silence builds trust and emotional safety. People are far more likely to speak honestly when they sense they are not being rushed or judged. When someone listens silently and attentively, it signals genuine care, a quality rare in today's fast-moving world. That care fosters intimacy, collaboration, and harmony. By embracing silence as a vital part of listening, we move away from communication as performance and toward communication as connection. The most powerful conversations are often those where the loudest truth is not spoken but silently received, understood, and held. Words, when carefully chosen and mindfully spoken, have the capacity to carry silence within them. This may sound paradoxical, yet it is through the quality of the words, not their quantity, that silence is honored and expressed. Words that emerge from a place of reflection, stillness, or deep emotional awareness often resonate more than loud or rapid speech. They are soaked in the quiet from which they were born. A calm assurance, a simple phrase like, "I understand," or "I'm here," can hold volumes of unspoken empathy and presence. In this way, the words we speak become vessels, not for filling silence with noise, but for giving that silence a form that others can connect with and feel. This idea is beautifully evident in the way poets, mystics, and wise thinkers use language. They do not use words to overpower or dazzle, but to guide others inward. Their expressions often carry more weight in what they allow to remain unsaid than in what they explicitly declare. Such language respects silence and seeks to preserve it, not replace it. It functions like a bridge between the inner world and the outer one, offering just enough structure for meaning to emerge, while leaving space for personal interpretation and emotional resonance. Through this kind of speech, silence does not disappear. It travels quietly within the words, enhancing their depth and mystery. Moreover, when words are infused with silence, they foster a more contemplative form of communication. Instead of rushing through conversation or asserting one's viewpoint aggressively, silent-centered language encourages a slower pace, thoughtful responses, and sincere expression. It reflects a consciousness that is not concerned with being the loudest voice in the room, but with being the most authentic. These are the kinds of words that do not demand attention, they invite it. They do not overwhelm, they welcome. And they do not seek to dominate, they seek to connect. The silence they carry acts as a grounding force, reminding both speaker and listener to remain present and attuned. In daily life, practicing the art of embedding silence into our speech can transform how we relate to others and to ourselves. Whether we are offering comfort, expressing gratitude, or simply sharing a story, the intention behind our words matters. When our words arise from a still and honest place, they carry an unspoken energy that can be felt as much as heard. Listeners can sense the calm between syllables, the breath between sentences, and the respect held in the pause. It is in this unhurried exchange that communication becomes more than transactional. It becomes sacred. Words become less about filling space and more about honoring the silence that shapes them. In a world that often equates value with volume and speed, choosing silence and learning to share it through words becomes an act of quiet courage, It invites us to speak with care, to listen with depth, and to connect with others beyond the surface. Silence is not a void to be feared, but a space where truth, presence, and emotion can unfold. When we learn to honor silence in our words, we begin to communicate not just with our voices, but with our hearts. Let us carry this understanding forward, to speak less when less is needed, and to speak with more meaning when it truly matters. Through silence, we find not emptiness, but the essence of all that connects us.